You think control is about strength, about forcing discipline, about tightening your grip until nothing escapes. But if that were true, why are so many disciplined people still exhausted? Why do those who appear composed fall apart? The moment life applies pressure, the truth is simple and uncomfortable. If you cannot control yourself, your emotions, your impulses, your reactions, then control will always come from the outside, from people, from systems, from fear. And fear is the most efficient master there is. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that a man ruled by anger is not powerful. A man ruled by desire is not free, and a man ruled by approval already belongs to something he does not command, not to a tyrant, but to expectation. Watch your own day and be honest. How often do you react before you think? How often does irritation decide your tone? How often does discomfort push you toward distraction? You call these small moments, but small moments are where authority is decided. Most people do not lose themselves through collapse. They lose themselves through compromise. One unchecked reaction, one excuse, one indulgence justified because it felt earned, and slowly the mind learns a dangerous lesson that impulse leads and reason follows. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events," but this was never an invitation to escape reality. It was a demand to stop surrendering your inner state to what you cannot command. The moment you fail to control yourself, you become predictable, and predictability is weakness, because anything predictable can be manipulated. Your anger can be provoked, your fear can be triggered, your pleasure can be sold back to you. This is why self-control is not denial, it is authorship. It is deciding who writes your actions, the moment or you. Every time you say, "I could not help it," you hand the pen away, and the world takes notes when you do. The Stoic path does not begin with domination. It begins with observation, watching yourself without excuses, without judgment, without drama. Because you cannot govern what you refuse to look at, and most people avoid looking inward because they confuse awareness with blame. The Stoics never did. They treated awareness as strategy. Before you can command your life, you must learn to pause between stimulus and response, between desire and decision, between emotion and action. That pause is small, almost invisible, but inside it lives freedom. And if you cannot find that pause, no amount of status, discipline, or ambition will protect you. You will always be reacting, always adjusting, always controlled. This is where the work begins, not with changing the world, but with refusing to be dragged by it. You think freedom comes from accumulation, from gathering more wealth, influence, or allies. But the Stoics understood early that freedom is internal, that it is the capacity to govern oneself without begging the world for permission. Most people mistake movement for progress. They chase opportunity, clamor for attention, and seek approval in every interaction. Yet the more they seek, the less they find, because control is not about circumstance, it is about response. The measure of a person is not in the power they wield over others, but in the restraint they exercise over their own mind and body. Before you can claim mastery over the outer world, you must master the inner world. Observe your impulses with clarity. See anger arise without acting on it. Feel desire without immediately indulging it. Notice fear whispering without obeying it. This is not weakness, this is strategy. The Stoics called it training the mind like a soldier prepares for battle. You do not charge without awareness. You do not react without assessment. The pause between stimulus and action is where sovereignty lives, and yet few notice it because it is invisible, quiet, almost imperceptible in daily life. Strength is not loud. It does not demand applause. It does not seek validation in faces or words. Real strength is stillness. It is calm in the face of chaos. It is the capacity to carry your own compass, even when the crowd pulls elsewhere and the world expects otherwise. The one who masters themselves is neither desperate for approval nor afraid of isolation. They choose their company, not for comfort, but for alignment. They let go of distractions, not because they hate others, but because they love clarity. They reduce noise around their thoughts, so that observation becomes possible, so that judgment is sharp and deliberate, so that action is precise rather than reactive. And the truth is, you will lose people along this path not because you harmed them, but because you grew without them. Permission growth is never polite, it never waits, it does not ask, it commands, and those who cannot follow will either complain or retreat, and that is acceptable, because the Stoics taught that what matters is the alignment of the self, not the approval of the many. The inner fortress is built brick by brick, thought by thought, choosing what enters and what is left outside. And it is in this construction that freedom reveals itself. The mind that governs itself is unshakable. It sees the world as it is, not as it wishes it to be. It hears praise without pride and criticism without collapse. It acts with purpose, without expectation, and it observes all things without attachment. For control is not possession, it is sovereignty. It is the ability to respond and not react, to feel and not be consumed, to act and not be compelled. And in this understanding lies the beginning of all power, the kind that does not depend on allies, influence, or fortune, the kind that cannot be stolen and cannot be given away, the kind that is quiet yet absolute, the kind that shapes destiny, not by domination but by the mastery of self. This is the path the Stoics walked, and the path that anyone can walk if they are willing to watch themselves with patience, to endure the silence, to honor the pause, and to finally understand that the first and last frontier of all control is within. Power is not what most people imagine it to be. It is not in applause or recognition. It is not in the number of people who follow you or the wealth you can display. The Stoics understood that the true test of strength is in the silence, in the moments when no one is watching and the only audience is your own mind. It is in the restraint to act when instinct demands it to pause, when impulse calls to surrender, when desire whispers for indulgence. The world will often mistake passivity for weakness. They will judge you for solitude, for reflection, for choosing to observe rather than react. But the Stoics knew that what is invisible is often the most consequential. The character of a person is not measured by spectacle, it is measured by consistency, by integrity, by the capacity to remain grounded in principle when every external factor is urging deviation. Notice how often you are led by the expectation of others, how often you have compromised your clarity for comfort, how often you have yielded your attention to distractions that offer no growth, that satisfy nothing but the momentary craving of the senses. Every time you allow yourself to be swept by impulse, you are handing authority over to forces you cannot control, and the consequences compound slowly, invisibly, like erosion over stone, until your judgment is dulled, your vision narrowed, your mind enslaved. The Stoics taught that every choice is a brick in the fortress of self-mastery, and every reaction unchecked is a crack in that wall. Observe your anger as it rises without feeding it. Notice fear without fleeing. Notice desire without submitting. And in these small moments you reclaim autonomy. You realize that the world outside does not shape you. Your mind does not bend to circumstance, but circumstance reveals your discipline if you allow it to. It is not denial to refuse the demands of fleeting impulses. It is the art of authorship, the mastery of the pen that writes your actions, the cultivation of a mind that is sovereign first to itself, and only then able to interact with the chaos of the world with precision, patience, and purpose. Because once you begin to govern these subtle inner currents, you no longer need approval. You no longer need validation. You no longer need to prove yourself to anyone. The mastery that matters is the one silent and unseen, the one that ensures that when the storms of life arrive, you are unmoved. When criticism reigns, you are unshaken. When desire tempts you, you remain intact. The true power the Stoics valued is this quiet strength, a strength that is never flaunted, never demanded, and cannot be taken because it exists entirely within, and as such it is absolute. It is yours alone to cultivate, protect, and wield. And in realizing this, the mind experiences a freedom that the majority of men will never know, because they have spent their lives being ruled by everything outside themselves, rather than mastering the only realm that matters, the one that is always present, the one that cannot be taken, the one that is you. You measure progress by what you acquire, by recognition, by external markers. Yet the Stoics taught that true advancement is measured internally by the subtle shifts in self-governance, by the quiet victories over impulse, over thoughtless speech, over fleeting pleasure. Most people never notice these changes because they are not accompanied by applause. They are invisible to the world, but visible to the mind that watches itself closely. The journey begins with attention. It begins with asking honestly which actions come from reason and which come from habit or desire, noticing without judgment that every thought you allow to dominate has power over you, and every reaction you fail to control chips away at your autonomy, because the mind that bends to circumstance is a mind enslaved, and the first step in liberation is to stop bending it, is to cultivate observation without distraction, without flinching, without seeking comfort in the crowd. Once you recognize that external control is an illusion, that the only authority worth cultivating resides within you, the world begins to shift its meaning. You see the faces that once seemed loyal, revealing their limits. You feel the approval that once felt necessary, losing its grip. And in the absence of dependence, there is clarity. The clarity to act decisively without hesitation, without consultation, with voices that do not understand, without permission. That is when true discernment arises. The Stoics called it alignment, not with the crowd, not with fortune, but with the rational self, with the unshakable core that knows when to act and when to remain still. Every decision made with calm observation strengthens this inner citadel. Every choice made with patience, resilience, and deliberate restraint adds a brick to the fortress that no chaos can dismantle, no betrayal can penetrate. And this is the hidden work, the quiet mastery that most mistake for passivity, yet it is M.O. Repotent than any display of power, more enduring than any alliance, more commanding than any shouted decree. And still the path is lonely because most cannot follow it. They are tied to the currents of approval, desire, and fear. They mistake noise for guidance and proximity for loyalty. They cling to distraction as though it were wisdom. They chase reaction as though it were action. Yet you must persist in solitude, because only in solitude can you see clearly, only in silence. Can you hear the subtle directions of reason? Only in calm. Can you cultivate a mind free from external claim? You will find that as the circle around you thins, the air grows lighter and sharper, that the fewer voices you carry, the clearer the vision becomes, the decisions harder, but truer, the moments of pause almost sacred. And in this tightening of focus, there is power not in domination but in restraint, not in applause but in stillness, not in possession but in self-possession. And this is the point the Stoics sought to teach, that the life worth living is one governed from within. That mastery is a quiet, constant force that does not boast, that cannot be borrowed, that cannot be taken away, and that once achieved ensures that no circumstance outside yourself ever rules you again. Control is not a thing. Granted, it is not a reward. It is not earned by accumulation of power, influence, or fleeting recognition. It is forged quietly in the moments that no one notices, in the pauses between stimulus and response, in the refusal to yield to the demands of impulse or the seduction of desire. The Stoics understood that a man who cannot govern his own mind is enslaved, regardless of wealth, status, or reputation, and that mastery over self is the foundation upon which all other power rests. Observe yourself, and you will see how easily the mind surrenders to the trivial, how quickly distraction steals your focus, how often fear dictates your speech, how readily comfort overrides reason. And it is in these unnoticed concessions that the seeds of control are sown or destroyed. One argument allowed to fester, one indulgence excused, one reaction justified without awareness teaches the mind that it is not sovereign, and the world will recognize this weakness quickly because predictability invites manipulation. And those who do not understand the subtlety of true power will attempt to bend you to their own desires. Yet, when you begin to exercise restraint, when you pause before reacting, when you choose deliberate alignment over immediate satisfaction, the nature of authority transforms around you. You do not seek command. The world responds to your steadiness. Your decisions become measured, your presence quiet but undeniable. And in this cultivation of inner control, there is a freedom that cannot be borrowed, cannot be stolen, cannot be disrupted by circumstance, because it does not rely on circumstance. It relies on something far more enduring: the disciplined mind, the self-aware spirit, the observer capable of remaining present in every moment, without surrendering to the chaos that surrounds it for control, begins and ends within, and no ally can grant it, no fortune can buy it, no applause can maintain it, and yet few pursue this rigor because it is slow, it is invisible, it is lonely, and it demands patience. The kind that feels like resistance and solitude, the kind that tests the depth of your conviction. But for those who endure, for those who choose observation over reaction, restraint over indulgence, discipline over convenience, life shifts. The world bends and the mind experiences a sovereignty so absolute that chaos itself becomes irrelevant, for when the mind is steady, the storms outside can rage endlessly, yet within there is an immovable calm, an authority over self that the world cannot claim, and the power of this M is more enduring than any fleeting recognition, more compelling than any external validation, more protective than any ally or fortress, because it is yours entirely, and you alone have the capacity to maintain it, to nurture it, to wield it responsibly in silence, in stillness, in the quiet mastery of the self. You believe that influence is power, that recognition is strength, that having others depend on you defines your value. But the Stoics taught long ago that such measures are illusions. They are fleeting shadows, easily taken away by circumstance, by betrayal, by the shifting moods of those around you. True strength is rooted within it. It's cultivated in silence. It is tested in solitude. It is proven in moments when no one watches, and you must choose between impulse and reason, between convenience and principle. The world will rarely applaud these choices. It will rarely notice them, yet they are the foundation of sovereignty. Observe yourself honestly. Notice how often your mind reacts without pause, how often anger escalates before reason intervenes, how often desire dictates action before judgment has a chance to speak. These are not failures, they are lessons. They are reminders that control is not given. It is trained, it is forged slowly, steadily, brick by brick, in the daily practice of awareness, restraint, and deliberate choice. The path is lonely, because most cannot endure the quiet. Most cannot resist the easy gratification. Most cannot withstand the subtle pressure to conform. Yet it is precisely in this isolation that clarity emerges, when the crowd fades, when the noise diminishes. When expectation loosens its grip, you begin to see things as they are not, as you wish them to be, not as others paint them with flattery or fear with praise or criticism, but as they truly exist, unfiltered, unadorned, and in this vision, the mind discovers a power that cannot be shaken, a discipline that cannot be stolen, a calm that cannot be borrowed, for it resides entirely within you, and those who have cultivated it understand that no ally, no system, no fortune, no applause is necessary to maintain it, that the true measure of authority is not in commanding others, but in commanding oneself, and that every unchecked reaction, every impulse given freedom to rule, erodes this authority until it is weakened and vulnerable. And so you learn to pause, not as a concession, not as weakness, but as strategy to create space between stimulus and action, to observe without flinching, without judgment, without expectation. The moments in which you act with clarity rather than chaos become your victories, small, almost imperceptible victories that accumulate silently until the mind is strong, until the spirit is steady, until the self becomes unshakable. And the more you practice this, the more the world around you begins to bend, not because you forced it, but because your presence demands attention by virtue of its steadiness. Your decisions become deliberate, your movements purposeful, your voice calm but weighted. And in this cultivation of internal mastery, the Stoics remind us that freedom is not a gift. It is the result of unwavering observation of oneself, restraint in the face of desire, patience under pressure, and the courage to remain aligned with principle, even when it means standing alone, because only when the mind is sovereign over itself can it navigate the chaos outside without surrendering to it, without bending to the fleeting whims of circumstance. And this sovereignty is the beginning and end of all power. You have been told that life is shaped by circumstance, that power comes from opportunity, that influence comes from alliances, and yet the Stoics knew that all these are illusions, fleeting and unreliable. The only domain truly under your command is your own mind, the arena in which every choice is made, every impulse confronted, every emotion observed, and it is here that true mastery is forged. Notice how easily the mind surrenders to distraction, how quickly irritation dictates action, how often fear or desire bend your decisions without conscious consent. These are not trivial lapses, they are cracks in the fortress of self-control, and every time you allow a reaction to precede reflection, you relinquish a piece of sovereignty that cannot be reclaimed easily. The path is subtle, it is invisible to those who chase spectacle and recognition. Yet it is more potent than any external validation, more enduring than wealth, more unassailable than status because it exists entirely within and cannot be taken away. You must cultivate the ability to pause, to observe, to notice every impulse without acting immediately, to witness anger without feeding it, desire without indulging it, anxiety without fleeing it. And in this practice you begin to reclaim the pen of authorship that writes your actions. You begin to see that freedom is not granted, it is forged, that control is not given. It is earned slowly, deliberately, quietly in moments that seem inconsequential, yet compound over time until the mind is strong, until the self is unshakable, until your decisions are deliberate and your presence steady. The world may attempt to bend you through expectation, through flattery, through criticism, through chaos, but none of these can reach the person who governs themselves. The Stoics remind us that the measure of power is not in command over others, but in command over oneself, and that the quiet victories of restraint, patience, observation, and deliberate choice accumulate into a sovereignty that cannot be challenged, that does not demand recognition, and that allows the mind to navigate every circumstance without yielding, without surrendering, without being owned by forces outside itself. And in this realization there is clarity, freedom, and the beginning of true strength, the kind that does not falter when applause ceases, when allies leave, when fortune shifts, because it has always resided within you. It is yours to cultivate, yours to protect, yours to wield silently, steadily, deliberately. And the practice of this mastery is not for the faint-hearted. It is not for those seeking comfort or easy victories. It is for the one willing to endure solitude, to witness themselves fully, to pause before every reaction, and to understand that in governing the self, the mind becomes the master of everything else. You think control is about bending the world to your will, but the Stoics knew that control is never over the world, it is over the self, the arena where each decision is made, where each impulse is observed and each reaction measured. If you cannot govern your own mind, the world will govern it for you, and it does so subtly through desire, through fear, through expectation, and the quiet surrender of attention. Every time you let irritation dictate speech, every time you indulge a fleeting craving, every time you react before you pause, you are signing away authority over your life, and yet this is not cause for despair. It is an invitation to practice, to cultivate the pause, to build the internal fortress where no external chaos can penetrate. The fortress is constructed brick by brick in each deliberate choice, each observed emotion, each restrained reaction. It is slow, invisible work, but it is the work that matters, the work that ensures that when circumstances shift, when allies betray, when fortune fades, you remain unmoved and sovereign, because your authority never depended on them, it depended on you. Freedom is not the absence of challenge, it is the capacity to navigate it without surrender. It is the ability to remain composed when the world pushes against you, and to act not from impulse, but from principle. The Stoics understood that true strength is not loud, it does not need affirmation, it does not seek applause, it exists quietly in the mind that watches itself closely. The person who masters these moments does not react to every insult, to every slight, to every provocation. Instead, they pause, they observe, they respond deliberately. And their power is invisible yet undeniable. It is not granted, it is earned in solitude, in patience, in persistent self-observation. And the more you practice this, the less the chaos outside has sway over you, the less noise distracts you, the less approval is necessary, because the mind has learned its own rhythm. The inner compass becomes precise, unshakable, self-governed. And this is the domain the Stoics called sovereignty over self, not over circumstance, not over people, but over the only realm truly yours, the mind and the spirit. And so you must cultivate patience with yourself and the world, understanding that mastery is invisible and slow and often misunderstood. Others will see restraint as coldness, they will see solitude as isolation, they will see deliberate action as aloofness. Yet, these are the markers of the one who governs themselves, not the approval of the many, but the alignment of the self, not the chaos of others, but the clarity of mind, because every decision controlled, every impulse restrained, every thought observed builds the fortress within that is unshakable by fortune, unbending under pressure, impenetrable to manipulation. And this is the quiet revolution that the Stoics practiced every day, the slow accumulation of sovereignty through awareness and restraint until the mind is free, until the spirit is steady, until the self becomes the axis around which the world revolves, not because it forces the world to bend, but because nothing outside can bend it. Most people misunderstand what it means to be strong because they equate strength with visibility, with influence, with applause. But the Stoics understood that the truest form of power is quiet. It is internal. It is cultivated in solitude and refined in the crucible of observation. Every unchecked reaction, every indulgence surrendered to every fear, allowed to dictate thought chips away at this power, and every time you allow external circumstance to shape your response, you give away sovereignty. The practice begins with awareness, noticing the impulses that rise without acting, noticing the desires that whisper without yielding, noticing the anger that flares without submission. And in these small moments you reclaim authority over yourself, because mastery is not a grand gesture, it is the accumulation of deliberate, restrained choices. Over time, the Stoics taught that freedom is not granted. It is earned through patience, through discipline, through the willingness to confront the self honestly without excuses, without avoidance, without seeking comfort in distraction or in the approval of others. The person who governs themselves is unshakable, not because they have never faced chaos, but because they have learned to navigate it deliberately and calmly, to act with purpose, without reaction, to respond without surrender, to maintain inner alignment regardless of circumstance. And the world recognizes this authority not because it is loud, but because it is consistent, relentless, invisible, undeniable, and the mind that has cultivated this internal mastery no longer fears loss, approval, or misinterpretation, because it understands that the true locus of control is internal, that no fortune can bestow it, no alliance can grant it, no circumstance can steal it. It is wholly self-contained, and it is earned through observation, restraint, and deliberate choice. And the beauty of this mastery is that it multiplies quietly every disciplined pause, every withheld reaction, every intentional step builds upon the last until the mind becomes sovereign, the spirit unyielding, the self immovable. And when this point is reached, external chaos may rage, yet the person remains unmoved, because true control has never resided outside. It has always been within, and the only thing necessary to maintain it is the commitment to continue watching, continuing practicing, continuing choosing deliberately in the silence of observation, because in this silence lies freedom, in this restraint lies power, in this consistent cultivation lies sovereignty, the kind of sovereignty that no applause can mimic. No alliance can replicate, no fortune can influence, and once it exists it becomes the foundation for every decision, every action, every thought, because when the self governs itself, the world outside can no longer govern you. You have been taught that control is something external, something measurable in wealth, in influence, in the number of people who follow you. Yet the Stoics understood that control is never outside, it is always within, and the first step toward true mastery is realizing this simple truth. Notice how often your mind surrenders to irritation, to desire, to fear, how easily impulse dictates speech, how readily distraction steals your focus, how quickly convenience outweighs principle, and recognize that each concession chips away at authority, every moment, unchecked, every reaction, unobserved, is a lesson in submission to forces you cannot command. And yet there is hope, because see, control is cultivated, it is not given, it is trained, slowly, deliberately, in the daily practice of observing oneself, resisting impulse, restraining desire, and pausing before reaction. The mind that masters this daily practice builds a fortress that cannot be breached by circumstance, that cannot be shaken by chaos, and that grows stronger with each disciplined moment of observation. Strength is not demonstrated in the applause of others. It is not proven through recognition. It is revealed in the quiet pauses, in the restrained choices, in the deliberate steps taken when no one is watching. It is forged in solitude, in patience, in the willingness to endure discomfort in order to maintain clarity. The one who governs themselves does not seek validation from allies or fortune. They seek alignment with their rational self. They cultivate a presence that is steady, deliberate, unwavering, and in this cultivation, the mind discovers power that cannot be borrowed, cannot be stolen, cannot be diminished by anything outside, because the locus of authority is entirely internal. Every unchecked emotion, every indulgence surrendered to impulse is a crack in the fortress, and every deliberate pause, every observed reaction, every choice made with restraint strengthens it, building an internal citadel that withstands misfortune, betrayal, distraction, and chaos. And still the path is lonely, because most cannot endure the quiet, most cannot resist immediate gratification, most cannot withstand the subtle pressure to conform. Yet it is precisely in this solitude that clarity emerges, when expectation fades, when distraction diminishes, when noise ceases. You begin to see things as they are not, as you wish them to be, not as others attempt to paint them, but as they truly exist. And in this vision, the mind discovers freedom. Freedom not dependent on wealth, allies, fortune, or recognition, but on the deliberate practice of observation, restraint, and patience. The mind becomes sovereign over itself, and thus over circumstance, not through domination, but through alignment with principle and reason. And the more you cultivate this, the more external chaos loses its power, the more influence loses its grip, the more the world bends quietly around the immovable axis of the self. Because in the end, true control never comes from outside, it comes from within, and only through patient, consistent cultivation of awareness and restraint can it be achieved. You believe that strength comes from circumstance, from allies, from recognition, but the Stoics taught long ago that strength is cultivated within it, is forged in the quiet moments, in the pauses between impulse and action, in the deliberate restraint of desire, and the careful observation of thought and emotion. The world will rarely notice these victories. They are invisible. They do not appear in status, in applause, or in wealth. Yet they are the foundation of true sovereignty. Notice how easily your mind surrenders to irritation, to convenience, to fear, to fleeting pleasure. How readily distraction captures attention, how often impulse dictates reaction, and understand that each unobserved concession chips away at the citadel of self-control. Each unchecked response teaches the mind that it is not sovereign, and slowly, imperceptibly, authority leaks away until the person becomes predictable and easily manipulated. The Stoics understood that freedom is not granted, it is earned through the consistent practice of awareness, restraint, and deliberate choice, and each moment of reflection, each pause before action, Each decision made with clarity strengthens the mind, builds the fortress, and affirms the sovereignty of the self. The practice is slow, almost imperceptible, yet relentless, and the more you cultivate this, the less the external world can impose its will, the less noise can distract the mind, the less opinion can sway decisions, because when the mind governs itself, it becomes unmoved by circumstance, unbending under pressure, unyielding in chaos, and this internal mastery is the beginning and end of all power, because it is quiet, unseen, yet absolute. It is not dependent on fortune, it is not influenced by allies, it cannot be stolen, it cannot be taken away. It exists entirely within. And the person who possesses it navigates the world, deliberately responding rather than reacting, acting with purpose, without surrendering to impulse, without bending to desire, without fearing judgment. And in this practice, patience becomes second nature, observation becomes instinct, restraint becomes the default, and the mind achieves clarity, freedom, and sovereignty that no external force can touch. And the beauty of this practice is that it accumulates silently. Every choice, every pause, every observed reaction, reinforcing the internal citadel until the self becomes the axis around which life itself rotates, and the storms of life may rage endlessly outside, yet inside the mind remains unmoved, unwavering, and absolute, because the only control worth having has always resided within, and in this internal mastery, the Stoics show us the path, the slow, deliberate cultivation of sovereignty through awareness, restraint, and patient practice until the mind is free, the spirit is steady, and the self becomes inviolable. You have been taught that life can be mastered through accumulation of allies, influence, recognition. Yet the Stoics understood that true mastery is cultivated within it, begins with the mind, the internal landscape where every thought, every impulse, every emotion is observed, with honesty and clarity. The world will attempt to sway you through desire, through fear, through expectation, yet the person who governs themselves remains unshaken, because their authority resides internally. It is forged slowly in the deliberate practice of pausing before reacting, restraining desire, observing impulse without indulgence, and allowing reason to lead the mind, the moments when you pause before speaking, when you resist indulgence, when you observe irritation without succumbing to it, are the moments when sovereignty is claimed. These victories are invisible to the world, yet they are more potent than any external accolade, more enduring than wealth, more protective than alliances, because they build a fortress within that no circumstance can breach, no chaos can dismantle, and in this quiet accumulation of self-governance, the mind begins to experience true freedom. Freedom not granted by fortune, not borrowed from others, but earned through deliberate, consistent practice. Strength is not measured by applause or recognition, it is revealed in silence, in restraint, in deliberate action, undertaken without expectation of reward. The Stoics teach that the individual who masters these moments becomes unshakable, not because they avoid chaos, but because they have learned to navigate it deliberately, calmly, with clarity to act, without reaction to respond, without surrender to maintain alignment with principle in the face of shifting circumstance. The path is lonely, because most cannot endure it, most cannot resist immediate gratification, most cannot withstand subtle pressures to conform. Yet it is precisely in solitude that clarity emerges, when the noise diminishes, when expectation loosens, when distraction fades, the mind begins to see things as they are, not as it wishes them to be, not as others attempt to paint them, but as they truly exist, unfiltered, unadorned, and in this vision, power reveals itself not as spectacle but as alignment, not as influence but as sovereignty, not as control over others but as mastery over the self. And so you must cultivate patience with yourself and the world, understanding that the work of mastery is invisible, slow, and often misunderstood. Others will perceive restraint as coldness, solitude as isolation, deliberate action as aloofness. Yet these are markers of the individual who governs themselves, not the approval of the many, but the alignment of the self, not the chaos of others, but the clarity of mind. Every choice restrained, every impulse observed, every thought examined without indulgence, adds brick by brick to the fortress within that is unshakable by fortune, unbending under pressure, impenetrable to manipulation. And in this silent, deliberate accumulation lies the quiet revolution the Stoics practiced daily, the cultivation of sovereignty through awareness and restraint until the mind is free, the spirit steady, the self absolute and unmovable. And this internal mastery is the beginning and end of all power, because only when the self governs itself can it navigate the chaos outside without yielding, without bending, without surrendering. You often look outward for guidance, for reassurance, for proof that you are on the right path. Yet the Stoics remind us that the only guidance that truly matters is the one you give yourself, the internal compass that points not to popularity, not to approval, not to fortune, but to principle, reason, and deliberate action. Observe yourself, closely notice how often your mind yields to impulse, how frequently irritation dictates speech, how easily desire clouds judgment, how subtly fear bends decisions, and understand that every concession diminishes sovereignty. Every unobserved reaction strengthens external influence and weakens internal authority. Mastery begins in the small, almost imperceptible moments when you pause before acting, when you resist the pull of convenience, when you note your impulses without surrendering to them. It is not a single heroic act that defines the Stoic mind. It is the accumulation of tiny, consistent choices over time, the disciplined refusal to react to every provocation. The deliberate decision to act only when reason guides it is in these quiet, unseen victories that freedom is forged, not borrowed, not granted, but cultivated within, and the more you practice this, the less the world outside can disturb you, the less noise can distract you, the less approval can control you. You begin to understand that the storms of life are meaningless to the mind that governs itself, because the locus of authority is internal, not external. And the more sovereign your mind becomes, the more clarity you achieve, the more precise your actions, the more aligned your choices, the less the chaos of circumstance bends you. And in this cultivation there is patience. Patience to endure solitude, patience to observe without judgment, patience to restrain without resentment. And the path, while lonely, is purposeful because every pause, every deliberate choice, every restrained impulse adds another brick to the fortress within that is impervious to chaos, and in this imperviousness lies freedom. A freedom the world cannot offer, a freedom that cannot be stolen, a freedom that ensures that when the noise ceases, when allies abandon, when fortune shifts, you remain unmoved, calm, deliberate, absolute. And this is the quiet mastery the Stoics valued, the mastery that cannot be granted, cannot be borrowed, cannot be diminished, and only through patient, consistent, deliberate observation and restraint can it be achieved. And once it is achieved, it shapes every thought, every action, every decision, because the self has become sovereign, the mind unshakable, and the spirit unwavering. And in this sovereignty, the individual experiences true power, not the kind flaunted to the world, but the kind that exists quietly within, untouched, unchallenged, absolute and complete. You spend much of life seeking validation in others, approval in their words, recognition in their attention. Yet the Stoics understood that true authority resides entirely within the self. It is not borrowed from fortune, it is not granted by alliances, it cannot be stolen or diminished by circumstance. The measure of a person is found in the quiet mastery of thought, the deliberate restraint of impulse, the patient observation of emotion. And in these small, unnoticed victories, the mind cultivates sovereignty. The world outside will rarely recognize these victories. It will rarely applaud them, yet they are more consequential than any external accolade, more enduring than wealth, more protective than influence, because they build a fortress within that no chaos can breach, and no betrayal can dismantle. The person who governs themselves does not rely on others for guidance. They rely on reason, principle, and deliberate action. They cultivate a presence that is steady, calm, unshakable, And in this cultivation, the mind begins to experience freedom, the freedom to act, without reaction, to speak, without being driven by desire, to observe, without being consumed by fear. True strength is not loud. It does not demand recognition. It is forged in silence, in the deliberate accumulation of restrained choices. Every decision paused, every impulse resisted, every emotion observed without indulgence, strengthens the citadel within. And slowly this internal mastery reshapes the individual. The mind becomes precise, deliberate, unflinching the spirit, steady, unwavering the self, sovereign over itself, and in this sovereignty the external world loses its ability to control it. Chaos becomes irrelevant, opinion, meaningless flattery, ineffective criticism, harmless because the locus of power is no longer outside. It resides entirely within, and the practice of this mastery is continuous. It is patient, it is invisible, it is slow, almost imperceptible, yet relentless, and the more it is practiced, the more the mind develops clarity, discipline, and resilience. The individual learns to navigate the world deliberately, calmly, with purpose, responding to circumstance rather than reacting to it. And in this navigation, the Stoics remind us that patience, observation, restraint, and deliberate choice are the tools of sovereignty, the instruments through which the mind becomes unassailable. And yet the path is lonely, because most cannot endure it. Most cannot resist the temptation of immediate gratification. Most cannot withstand the subtle pressure to conform. Yet it is precisely in this solitude that clarity emerges, when noise diminishes, when expectation loosens, when distraction fades. The mind begins to see things as they are not, as it wishes them to be, not as others paint them, but as they truly exist. And in this vision, power is revealed, not as domination, but as alignment, not as control over others, but as mastery over the self. Every disciplined pause, every observed impulse, every deliberate choice builds the fortress within the individual, becomes unshakable, unmoved, deliberate. And in this quiet accumulation of sovereignty, the Stoics show us that true mastery is not granted. It is earned through patient, consistent practice, observation, and restraint until the mind is free, the spirit steady, and the self absolute and unmovable. You think strength is measured by how many people follow you, by the recognition you receive, by the power you can project. Yet the Stoics teach that true strength is internal. It is forged quietly in the moments when no one is watching, in the pauses between stimulus and response, in the deliberate restraint of impulse, and the careful observation of thought and emotion. The world will rarely notice these victories, yet they are the foundation of sovereignty. Observe yourself closely. Notice how often the mind surrenders to anger, to desire, to fear, to distraction. Each unobserved reaction, each indulgence surrendered to impulse chips away at authority. Every concession teaches the mind that it is not sovereign, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, power leaks away until the individual becomes predictable, easily influenced, and enslaved by circumstance. Mastery begins with the subtle recognition that the mind is the locus of control, and continues through the consistent practice of observation, restraint, and deliberate choice. Each moment paused, each temptation resisted, each emotion noted without indulgence is a brick in the fortress of self, and over time these bricks accumulate, creating a mind that is unshakable, a spirit that is unwavering, a self that is sovereign over itself. And in this sovereignty, the individual experiences freedom, the freedom to act without reaction, to speak, without being driven by desire, to observe, without being consumed by fear. And the more this internal mastery is practiced, the less the world outside can dictate terms, the less noise can distract the mind, the less opinion can sway decisions, because the mind has learned its own rhythm. The internal compass becomes precise, deliberate, unshakable. And this is the essence of true power, not loud, not dependent, not borrowed, but quiet, absolute and complete. And the beauty of this mastery is that it multiplies silently. Every disciplined pause, every observed impulse, every deliberate action builds upon the last until the mind becomes sovereign. the spirit steadfast, the self immovable, and when this point is reached, external chaos may rage endlessly, yet the individual remains unmoved, because control has never resided outside. It has always been cultivated within, and only through patient, consistent, deliberate practice of observation and restraint can it be achieved. And once it is achieved, it shapes every thought, every action, every decision, because the self has become the axis around which life itself rotates. The storms of life cannot shake it. The opinions of others cannot bend it. The fluctuations of fortune cannot sway it. And in this internal sovereignty, the Stoics show the ultimate lesson that mastery is quiet, patient, deliberate, consistent, and wholly internal, and that true power exists only in the mind that governs itself. You often look to the outside world for signs, for approval, for validation, yet the Stoics teach that the only authority that truly matters is the one within the self. It is not borrowed. It cannot be granted. It cannot be stolen. It is earned through deliberate observation, restraint, and consistency. Notice how often your mind reacts before it reflects, how often anger dictates speech, how often desire overrides judgment, how easily distraction redirects attention, and understand that each of these concessions diminishes sovereignty. Each unchecked reaction erodes internal authority. Mastery begins in the quiet, invisible moments. When you pause before action, when you resist impulse, when you note emotion without yielding to it. It is not a dramatic, heroic act that defines power. It is the consistent accumulation of these small choices over time, the disciplined refusal to surrender to every provocation, the deliberate alignment of action with reason and principle. And in these unseen victories, the mind cultivates freedom, a freedom that is independent of fortune, allies, recognition, or circumstance. And the more you practice this, the less external chaos can sway you, the less noise can distract you, the less approval can control you. You begin to see that sovereignty resides within, and the external world is merely a reflection of your internal discipline. True strength is not shown through influence. It is not proven by recognition. It is revealed in restraint, in deliberate choice, in patient observation. The person who governs these moments does not react to every insult, slight, or provocation. Instead, they pause, they observe, they respond with precision and clarity. Their power is invisible, yet undeniable. It is not dependent on external circumstances. It is cultivated internally through practice, patience, and awareness. The individual who masters these moments develops a mind that is unshakable, a spirit that is steadfast, a self that is sovereign and aligned with principle. The storms of life, the shifts of fortune, the opinions of others may rage endlessly, but the internally sovereign person remains unmoved, deliberate, calm, and absolute, because authority has been cultivated internally and the locus of control is no longer external. And yet the path is lonely, because most cannot endure the quiet, most cannot resist immediate gratification, most cannot withstand subtle pressure to conform. Yet it is precisely in this solitude that clarity emerges. When expectation fades, when distraction diminishes, when noise ceases, the mind begins to see things as they are not, as it wishes them to be, not as others attempt to paint them, but as they truly exist. And in this vision, power is revealed, not as domination, but as alignment, not as control over others, but as mastery over the self. Every observed pause, every restrained impulse, every deliberate choice builds the fortress within that is impervious to chaos, and in this quiet accumulation of sovereignty, the Stoics show us that true mastery is earned through patient, consistent, deliberate practice of observation and restraint until the mind is free, the spirit steady, and the self absolute and unmovable. The final lesson the Stoics teach is that mastery over the self is not a destination, it is a continuous practice. It is the quiet accumulation of restraint, observation, patience, and deliberate choice. Each day, each moment. The mind governs itself before responding to impulse, before surrendering to desire, before yielding to fear, and in this practice, the individual discovers sovereignty, a freedom that cannot be borrowed, cannot be taken, cannot be shaken by circumstance, for it exists entirely within, and the world outside becomes secondary, because control has always resided internally. The higher you rise in this quiet mastery, the fewer voices you need, the less approval matters, the fewer distractions can disturb you, the more clarity your vision becomes. And in this clarity you realize that the pursuit of external validation is hollow. The chase of influence is transient, the need to be seen is inconsequential. What matters is the stillness, the observation, the disciplined alignment of action with principle, the courage to stand alone, the patience to endure discomfort, the wisdom to allow solitude to refine the mind. The person who reaches this place is calm, deliberate, unmoved by the storms of life or the chaos of circumstance. Their thoughts are precise, their actions intentional, their spirit unwavering because they have cultivated the internal fortress, the invisible citadel where true power resides. The world may never recognize it, may never applaud it, may never understand it, but it is theirs, entirely theirs, to protect theirs, to nurture theirs, to wield silently, steadily. Absolutely. And for the viewer listening now, who is ready to walk this path, who is ready to cultivate internal sovereignty, who is ready to master the self, this is where the journey begins. And if you are ready to commit to the quiet work of observation, restraint and deliberate choice, remember to subscribe to Stoicism Notebook, where we explore these practices daily and continue building the mind that cannot be shaken, the self that cannot be bent, and the spirit that remains steadfast through every circumstance.